Hi, so for literal years, people have been asking me to cover Leviathan by Scott Westerfield, and I guess I'll start this video by saying I think it's good.
This is the introduction song. It's not very good, but it's not too long.
Yeah, I like Leviathan. I think it's a good book series. The characters are solid, they're likable, the world is cool, the overall themes and messaging are generally interesting, with a few exceptions that I'll get into, and the action scenes are fun. So I thought that these books are good. That said, I'm not sure why I've gotten so many requests for them over the years. Like, after finishing, I have to stop and wonder, like, does this really stand out in your minds that much? Because while I did like the books, they are a bit of a mess. You know, there's plenty of things to complain about here. And I'll admit up front that I'm not really the target audience for this. You know, it's written for kids or teenagers. You know, had I read this when it came out like 16 years ago, I think I would have liked it more. All right, hold on. Why does everything have to be slightly difficult when I start filming? So I probably would have liked these books more had I read them when they first came out, you know, when I was a teenager, partially because I was less critical back then, but also just because I'm older now. You know, I have a different perspective on things. And in fact, I would recommend, if you were like a big fan of these books back in the day, I would recommend rereading them. In fact, I would say that for just all sorts of books in general. Like, if you read it when you were young, try rereading it today, because the books haven't changed, but you have, and it'll give you a new perspective on things. Anyways, Leviathan is for a young audience, but I still liked it. You know, it takes place in an alternate timeline. You know, it's very similar to our world in 1914, right on the cusp of World War I. But technology is a lot different. Some countries utilize diesel punk technology that allows them to have stuff like tanks that walk and cannons that shoot lightning. And yes, a lot of people call it steampunk, but this Leviathan is diesel punk. Because steampunk implies that steam engines are being used along with a Victorian English aesthetic. Better entries in the steampunk genre will deal with stuff like, you know, social and political issues of the day, stuff like slavery, workers' rights, and old feudal power structures being overtaken and subsumed by capitalist ones. That's kind of rare, though. Most of the time, it's just Victorian dresses and science fiction technology. Diesel punk, by contrast, is what people in the early 20th century, around the time of World War I, imagined technology would be like as it advanced. You know, good entries in the diesel punk genre, like Leviathan, display the horrifying destructive power that modern industry and technology are capable of. You know, look at paintings and pictures of World War I battlefields. You know, you see entire forests that have been blasted to pieces so that they don't even resemble nature anymore, or entire towns and cities that have been turned to rubble in just a couple of days, oftentimes, or even less. And then later on, during World War II, shit got even worse. You know, war was no longer about individual skill or bravery or chivalry. All of the men were just parts of a machine that did nothing but tear down human civilization. And, just so we're clear, I think Leviathan does a pretty good job of showcasing the horror and the tragedy of this sort of thing, of how technology and industry have advanced to this point. I think Leviathan does a good job of that. Now, I call Leviathan diesel punk, but for the record, the author does disagree with me. He calls it steampunk, but I don't know. I feel like maybe you should take my opinion here with a grain of salt. Anyways, the point is, there's a lot of diesel punk technology around, and some countries use this diesel punk tech. They're called clankers, typically, and that includes countries like Germany and Austria-Hungary. Now, other places figured out how to manipulate and create life, so they are like cloning animals and also mixing them together and almost making artificial living creatures to perform specific tasks for them. They've created giant bears, they've created whales that can fly. We'll get more to that in a minute. And these people are typically called Darwinists, and that includes most other countries like France and the United Kingdom and Russia. And ideologically, these two sides are opposed to one another. Now, the actual story of Leviathan is about a boy named Alec, who is the son of Franz Ferdinand. Now, Alec wasn't a real person, but Franz Ferdinand was. And the book begins with Ferdinand being assassinated in Sarajevo, which sets events into motion which later start World War I, which is similar to what happened in real life. However, unlike real life, Alec has to go on the run because the Germans are the ones that killed his dad, actually. And the Germans did that because they wanted the war to start.
That doesn't make sense.
So, look, this is a work of alternate history, and as such, changes are going to be made. Some of the changes here, however, do leave a sour taste in my mouth, and I don't like them very much. I will get more into that in the spoilers section, though. Don't worry. Now, while Alec is on the run, there's a British girl named Darren who has disguised herself as a boy so that she can join the crew of an airship. Now, remember, their technology is all living, so this airship is called a Leviathan, and it's literally just a genetically modified whale that produces hydrogen and flies, which is just as insane as it sounds. Now, their journeys bring them together, because Alec and his friends hide out in an old castle in the mountains, and then Darren's airship goes on an important mission, but it crashes nearby, and then the Germans come to kill Alec, and the Brits get caught up in it, so they all work together to escape. And then they have to just not die in the war. Like, yeah, the characters don't have a super clear goal throughout a lot of the story here, which is just one of the issues that these books run into. Or at least, the Brits do have an important mission, but we don't find out exactly what it is until book 2, and then in book 3 they get a new important mission that they need to do. However, the important missions that they're doing seem to fall by the wayside almost. You know, it's like Alec just tends to go off on his own tangents, and that's really what the story is about. That said, now that I've finally gotten to the premise of the books, let's go over what I liked and disliked. We'll do like a compliment sandwich, like something I liked, something I disliked, and then we'll just go back and forth like that. Something I liked. Alec is a very good protagonist for this type of story. I don't think he's amazing, but I think he's good. It is surprisingly difficult to write kid protagonists that are, good characters. Or really just kid characters in general are very difficult to write. And oftentimes they have zero personality beyond being some sort of chosen one. And sometimes they will have personality, but they'll feel more like an adult in a child's body. And other times they'll just act like complete idiots. And look, guys, kids are not complete idiots most of the time. Like, they act like idiots, sure, but that's usually because they're inexperienced. And as you grow up, you stop acting that way. Growing up is a lot like falling asleep. You don't even realize that you're changing until after it's already happened. Alec in Leviathan does avoid most of those problems, because he's not a regular kid, and the books never try to paint him as a regular kid. He's a prince. He's highly educated and skilled in a few key areas, but he is also woefully naive in other areas, and so he has trouble navigating the world sometimes. At the same time, he has responsibilities due to his position, and he feels the burden of those responsibilities. Like, he knows that there are people who depend on him to lead. But in spite of all that, he's a good person. Even when it would be easier, or arguably smarter, for him to leave others to die or refuse to help those who need it, he does put himself at risk for them, and it costs him. He doesn't just do the heroic thing and everything's great. He has to pay the price for doing the heroic thing. This costs him money, it costs him a safe haven, and it costs him relationships with other people. But he never wavers, and he is always willing to do what's right. Like I mentioned earlier, in the first book, he finds a crew of stranded British airmen, and he helps them, against the wishes of his advisors who are looking out for him. Those guys are on the opposite side of a war, but Alec can't just abandon them to die, and because he helps them, they become his allies, and then they all work together and they go off to save the day. Kind of. So Alec isn't actually the heir to the throne or anything, at least he's not supposed to be, but early on we do learn that he's been named heir to the throne by the Pope. And that's not legal, and in no way would it work in real life, but fuck it. For the sake of this book and for the sake of this story, I will accept that, sure, Alec is the true heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. Alec learns a lot, and he does become somebody who will someday take charge of an entire empire, and I can't help but think that he'll probably be very good at it. He has a strong moral compass, and he'll always do what's right, and as a result of that, he's very good at making allies and getting people who dislike each other to work together, which, yeah, that's what a leader does, especially the leader of an entire country, which is made up of a bunch of, let's say, disparate religions and ethnic groups. Now, I think I'm a bit too old to look at Alec and say like, oh, he just like me, for real, or anything like that, but I can still sympathize with him and identify with him. And I gotta say, it's been a minute since I read a young adult book series with a protagonist that was anything better than just passable. You know, pretty much everything I've read in that genre for a couple of years now, they've been either bad or just fine. Although I do want to point out that Alec's great uncle, the Emperor of Austria-Hungary, is Franz Joseph, who was a real person. And you remember Blood Rose Rebellion? Like, probably not. I think I'm the only person that's ever fucking talked about those books. But Franz Joseph was the losing leg of the love triangle in that book. Yeah, like, he just kind of keeps popping up for some reason. Something I dislike. This series is way too short to tell the story that it wants to tell, or to explore the world that it creates here. Like, it's only 3 books long, and these books aren't particularly long either. You know, it's just a small trilogy, so it should really be telling a story that a small trilogy is set up to tell. But instead, they try to introduce us to this entire world, explain that there's a war, show how that war proceeds, introduce and develop a whole cast of characters, display the political situation in several countries, handwave the geopolitical situation that led to war, show off the different weird types of technology that exist, show the heroes going on a long-ass journey all over the world, and include some action scenes. Like, those books try to do all of that, and that is a lot. That sort of story belongs in a colossal epic, not a modest-length young adult trilogy. And so as a result, a lot of the cool stuff just gets thrown by the wayside. You know, like in Book 2, the characters spend most of their time working alongside revolutionaries in the Ottoman Empire. And the situation there is simplified to just, the monarchy is bad and we should replace it with a democratic republic, which, hey, I can get behind that. The problem is that we don't get to see how and why the characters are willing to risk life and limb to fight their own government. Like, the worst we see here is that the Sultan might drag them into the war on the side of Germany, but we also see that the regular Ottoman population has plenty of reasons to hate the British government, and, you know, the rest of the Entente powers by association. See, the British built a battleship for the Ottomans called the Osman, and when the war started, the Brits just stole it. Like, the Ottomans had already paid for it. And it wasn't just paid for via taxes. A lot of regular citizens donated money. You know, they drained their savings accounts and they sold their stuff to raise funds for it. And then at the end, the British just said, no, we're taking this for ourselves. Like, they have reasons to be pissed off. And this was a real thing that happened, and the books do mention it as well. And funnily enough, it was Winston Churchill who made the decision to steal their ship, actually, because he was the head of the British Navy at this time. And, you know, I feel like the only thing most people know about Winston Churchill is that he gave some inspiring speeches during World War II, and they tend to forget that outside of that, he was a dick. Just literally all the time, in every possible situation. That dude was a dick. There's a reason the British elected someone else to be prime minister like 2 weeks after World War II ended. The point is, in these books, the Ottoman Revolution just sort of happens and there's not time to explore it. And then later on, the heroes go to Mexico and they actually run into Pancho Villa. And he's fighting his own government, and he actually has a fleet of flying manta ray airships, which, yeah, alright, that's neat, but again, we don't get a good feel for why any of this is happening, or who Pancho Villa and his followers really are, or what they hope to accomplish, so it just comes across as a bizarre cameo. And most of the books are like this, you know, things happen, and I can kind of get into the events themselves, but they don't really have time to simmer. You know, they don't have time to explain what's going on or explore the neat ideas that they keep bringing up. So it just feels like everything is on 2 times speed, and I really just wanted it to slow down and take its time. Something I liked. The world here is absolutely nuts, but it is nuts in the best possible way. Like, the diesel punk technology, for starters, is a lot of fun. Okay, I was trying to, like, do a thing where I'm just holding this sword while talking, but it's honestly just getting in the way. I'm gonna just... We're just putting it away. But the diesel punk technology is fun. You know, instead of tanks, people use land walkers, which are kind of like tanks, but instead of having treads, they just walk along on legs so they can go over all sorts of terrain. And the clankers also have airships, which are kind of like zeppelins in real life, but they're way bigger and tougher. You know, they're giant floating fortresses of death. They can fire massive cannons at each other. They can bomb people on the ground. They later on introduced these things called Tesla cannons, which can fire lightning at people. Like, I want one of those. I want a Tesla cannon. That sounds awesome. And I weep for the path that technology took because, man, we could have had flying airship battles if we had just invested money in a few other places. Just saying. And later, when they go to Istanbul/Constantinople, which, like, at the time, the city was called Constantinople. It didn't become Istanbul until later, but the books mostly refer to it as Istanbul. And I thought long and hard about a way to include some sort of reference to that song, but I couldn't think of a way to do it that would actually be funny. Anyways, the characters go to Istanbul, and all the different quarters of the city actually have their own automatons guarding them. Like, you know, the Jewish quarter has mechanical golems that watch over the neighborhood and make sure that no bad people come in and try to attack them. Same with the Armenian quarter and the Greek quarter and so on. It helps keep the peace, and yeah, that's also just a neat little world-building detail that does make sense. Like, all of the clanker tech is neat, but I think the genetically modified animals that the Darwinists use are the real stars of the show here. Like, the Leviathan is a whale, like I mentioned earlier, and it's mixed with 100 other animals, so it can just be a giant airship, and they can, like, put crewmen in there and have them fly around places and do military stuff. And it's not just a giant whale. There's a whole ecosystem in place to keep it going. There are bacteria in its gut that produce hydrogen, and those bacteria are fed by honey, which is made by genetically modified bees. The crew has these modified dogs, which they use to sniff for leaks in the hydrogen container, whatever you would call that. They also have flocks of bats and birds that carry razor nets that will cut hostile airplanes out of the sky. And outside of that, the British Navy creates krakens and stuff that fight alongside their ships. You know, just giant squid creatures that can come along and attack other ships for them. The Japanese Navy uses kappa to fuck dudes up. The Russian Army creates these giant bears the size of houses, and they have mammoths for transporting materials, because, like, they don't want to use trains for some reason, so they just use giant mammoths instead. And I mentioned Pancho Villa earlier, and he has his own fleet of airships, which are kind of similar to the Leviathan, but instead of whales, they're based on manta rays. Like, the logistics of all of this really don't make sense if you stop to think about it. Like, there's no way they could possibly keep these things fed, just for starters. But that aside, they are really, really cool. Like, I love this world and all the technology that's in it. The ideological divide here is a bit strange, though. Like, because all of this is technology, but there are entire countries that will only use one or the other. Like, they'll use the mechanical technology, or they will do the genetic modification stuff, but they will never use both, which is just odd. Now, I can kind of understand why people would view these cloned artificial animals as abominations with no souls. In fact, Alec and some other characters do specifically say that at a few points, and I can kind of see where they're coming from, but I don't know why people would start hating diesel engines and trains and stuff. You know, like, those are still useful. Neutral countries in the war, like the Ottomans and the United States, actually use both types of technology. Which, yeah, that's probably what would happen in real life. Like, it's technology. When it works for your needs, you use it, and when it doesn't work for your needs, you don't use it. Like, that's how people have always worked. So the ideological divide there is just strange, but whatever, the airships and everything were really fucking cool. Something I dislike. The Germans are the only villains here, and that just straight up does not make sense. Like, the Germans are the ones that assassinated Franz Ferdinand, Alec's dad, and they did that to orchestrate the war, and they keep trying to kill Alec too, even though Alec is not politically important. Like, sure, he is the heir to the throne, kind of, but it's all secret. Like, very few people even know about it. I think they mention even Emperor Franz Joseph doesn't know about it, and Alec doesn't know about it until partway through the first book. And basically the reason for that is that his mother was not high-ranking nobility like his father, so both in real life and in the book, laws were set up so that none of her children could ever inherit anything. However, in the book, again, Alec was named as the heir, but it was done secretly and it was done illegally. Killing him would make the Germans look insane, and it wouldn't benefit them in any way. Like, they're allies with the Austrian government, and they're trying to kill a relative of the Austrian emperor. And they also keep invading both allies and neutral countries to try and catch Alec. Like, at that point, it would make more sense to just send an assassin after him or something. You know, give themselves some plausible deniability. And what would they get from killing him? Well, nothing. They would get no benefit from this. Like, the books don't even bother trying to explain it. They just say, yeah, the Germans really wanted the war to kick off, so that's why they killed your dad. Now they are also going after you. Like, I don't think they thought that through a whole lot. And that's the main reason I don't like that part of the story. But it also irks me in part because everyone, in real life, everyone was at fault for the war starting. You know, Germany does share some of the blame, but the books pin it entirely on Germany, which is just inaccurate and kind of unfair. Now, in real life, it was a Serbian nationalist who was assisted by elements of the Serbian government, and he assassinated the heir to the Austrian throne. And under normal circumstances, this would probably spark a regional war, but Austria and Serbia both dragged in their allies, and then other people who saw an opportunity to settle old scores hopped in too, and then both sides invaded neutral countries out of convenience. Like, most famously, Germany invaded Belgium in order to get to France, but also the Entente powers condemned them for that, yes, but then also the Entente powers invaded Greece later on. Again, just really out of convenience. Like, they were massive hypocrites. Everyone sucks here. There aren't any heroes or good guys in this story. Now, ultimately, Austria was the first country to declare war, so yes, they did start it, but everyone else contributed in some way. And even then, you can't treat any country as a monolith. You know, people in the Austrian and German governments straight up lied to the emperor and other higher-up people in the government. And then on the opposite side, people in France and Russia were chomping at the bit and took any excuse to go to war, specifically with Germany. Meanwhile, there were a lot of people on every side, diplomats mostly, who did their best to try and prevent the destruction that would come. And they failed, but they did their best to try and prevent it. And the later books in this series do inject some moral ambiguity in there, but not that much. And even if you set all that aside, the Germans are just boring as villains. Like, occasionally a German landwalker or airship or something will appear and attack the heroes, and none of them get names. Like, none of the German soldiers and airmen who are coming after them get names or personalities. They're all just one big amorphous blob that we're supposed to dislike and fear. Like, if there had been a specific general or colonel or something that was leading the pursuit of the heroes, then that might work, because he could be an actual character. They could make him, you know, complex and sympathetic, or they could make him one-dimensional and mustache-twirling, but, I mean, anything would be better than nothing, which is what we have. The books straight up have no villain. Something I liked, the character Count Volga. I thought he was pretty cool. Like, he's Alec's tutor, and after his parents' death, he's his guardian and his advisor. Like, he advises him on the path to take, and teaches him, and guides him. Like, he's a protective father figure to Alec, who, remember, both of his parents were recently murdered, so he really needs something like that, and I just like those kind of characters. Alec doesn't always listen to his advice, and Count Volga gets very frustrated with him because of that, but he always remains loyal to his prince, and again, that's just a type of character that I really like. Something I disliked was the ending, and I won't go into detail here, I'll save that for the spoiler section, but suffice to say, the ending to these books was unsatisfying. You know, it felt like the journey we went on didn't amount to much. Like, I'll just leave it there for now. Something I liked. Alan Cumming narrates the audiobooks, and he does a very, very good job. Granted, his American accent is a bit much. Yeah, he does that thing that a lot of British actors do, where they try to sound American, but then they put their voice into their nose just a little bit too much, and it's really nasally, and that's not what we sound like. The action scenes here are all pretty solid too. You know, they don't go on too long, which unfortunately a lot of authors make the mistake of dragging out action scenes too much. They largely involve the heroes using their wits to get out of trouble. Like, there's one scene where Alec is on a landwalker and they're being pursued at nighttime by other landwalkers, and there's people shooting at them, and they shoot a flare at them basically. So Alec grabs his sword and pries the bit of chemicals off of their machine and then throws it off somewhere else, so it distracts them and they run off the wrong way, and that gives them time to escape. A lot of modern writers would just have the characters fight their way through that by being so cool, but Alec has to use his head, and I liked that. Overall, Leviathan is a good book series. I think if the setup for this piques your interest at all, check it out. If you're looking for something steampunk adjacent, maybe give it a shot. If you're looking for something set in World War I, maybe give it a shot. Just keep in mind that ultimately this is for a younger audience, and some of the historical changes are just gross. But I'll get to that a bit more in the spoiler section, and that's about to start. So, I'll see you there. So, for the spoiler section, I have two main things that I need to complain about. I need to complain about the ending and some of the odd choices from the second book, which is called Behemoth. So like I said earlier, the bulk of this book is about the heroes helping out revolutionaries in the Ottoman Empire. And these revolutionaries are striving to overthrow the monarchy and replace it with a republic, which sounds great to me. These revolutionaries are called the Committee for Union and Progress, or CUP. The history buffs in the audience are already groaning right now. So the CUP was a real political party, and I'm not going to go into all of the details about late Ottoman history because it's confusing and a bit hard to follow, and most of you don't care. But suffice to say, the CUP were pretty nasty. Because in real life, they did take over the country before World War I started. The Sultan was still there, and officially he was still in charge, but in reality he had no real power, and the CUP was running things. And at first, the CUP was actually working with other political parties to enact reforms, because there were a lot of people who wanted changes to help out minorities, like both ethnic minorities and religious minorities, as well as women and poor people. And they were trying to fix the empire because it was very badly broken at the time. But for various reasons, the CUP not only consolidated their power and became more dictatorial, they also became a lot more right-wing and nationalist over time. They did standard dictatorship stuff, they had secret police that would murder anyone that spoke out against them, they rigged elections in their favor, they were extremely corrupt, just standard dictatorship stuff. And eventually this all culminated in them committing the Armenian genocide. Now, I really don't have the time or inclination to talk about that right now. I'll just say that if you want more information on the Armenian genocide, both what led up to it as well as the events of the genocide itself, the Lions Led by Donkeys podcast has a very good 4-part series on it. It's very depressing, but it's also very good and informative. The point I'm getting at here is, fuck the CUP. They were awful, and they murdered over 1 million people. And Leviathan kind of makes them out to just be some plucky, freedom-loving rebels. Imagine if somebody wrote an alternate history book for kids where the heroes go to Germany and help the Nazi Party overthrow the Weimar government. Except in this version of events, the Nazis are the good guys. We leave out everything about their ideology that is unpleasant, and we just say, yeah, they want freedom or something. Just the thought alone is off-putting. And the CUP is one of the few organizations in history that has committed atrocities that are at both the same scale and the same severity as the Nazi Party. You can compare them. They were that bad. And the heroes of these books are helping the CUP, which Like, honestly, just change the name. Like, they're a completely different organization from how they were in real life. Just give them a different name, and I wouldn't think twice. Like, call them the Turkish Freedom Fighters or something, and that would be fine. But that said, I do feel the need to mention that in this book series, the CUP does not commit any genocides. So, if you're Armenian, Greek, or Assyrian, good news.
What? No! Racism? Not today!
This isn't like Powerless, where the heroes commit genocide, but the author tries to convince us that it's not a big deal because the main character wants to smooch one of the perpetrators of the genocide. I hate that book. I really hate that book. The point is, Scott Westerfield is clearly a history buff, and he clearly knows a lot about this and is passionate about it, so I would chalk this up to him just not thinking things through. Like, I don't think he's a Turkish nationalist or anything, but it's still something I don't like. So now for my problems with the ending, we'll go to the final book, Goliath. And in this book, the heroes leave Istanbul, they cross Siberia, and along the way they pick up Nikola Tesla, the famous inventor. He's in this. And he has developed a weapon called Goliath that can destroy entire cities. Like, he was testing it out a couple of years earlier, and he accidentally destroyed a big chunk of Siberia in 1908. So they pick up Tesla, they cross Siberia, and then they go to America, they take a tour to Mexico for some reason, and then they reach New York. They manage to get some funding, and then they build a big Goliath tower, which, according to Tesla, can attack anywhere on Earth. And again, it can destroy basically an entire city all at once. And their plan by doing this is to threaten Germany and Austria-Hungary into surrendering. Just say, hey, surrender, or we will destroy Berlin, or we will destroy Vienna, because they can just do that now. But the Germans get wind of this, and so they launch a daring attack on the tower to try and destroy it. And I do just want to take a moment to say that in this final sequence, the Germans, who are supposed to be the villains of the series, are straight up just the good guys. Like, they are acting in self-defense at this point. And as we see, as they're attacking, Tesla kind of panics and he just decides to destroy Berlin while he still has a chance. So, like, millions of innocent people will be killed, and the Germans are trying to prevent that. Like, they're just straight up not the bad guys in the climax. Now, Tesla does justify his attempt to destroy an entire city full of innocent people by saying that it'll end the war, and if they don't do it, even more people will die in the grand scheme of things, which, I mean, I'm not going to say if that's right or wrong, but I do see where he's coming from. However, Alec is like, no, we're not killing innocent people, so he manages to stop him, and then the tower is destroyed. And then the books end with everybody saying that the war is going to keep going for several more years. Hooray. It also turns out that the Goliath doesn't work because Nikola Tesla was just testing it at the same time that an asteroid happened to hit the Earth. Again, the Tunguska event in 1908. And so they're like, oh, okay, I guess the threat wasn't really there at all. And then the books end. Like, Alec is gonna later, at some point, maybe, probably become the emperor of Austria-Hungary. I mean, like, his great-uncle is pretty old, and Alec is the heir, so just wait a couple of years and he'll be in charge. And then the war will also end, eventually, at some point. Like, it's not a very satisfying conclusion. Now, I think I understand the point that the books were trying to get at, which is that a plucky group of heroes can't stop a literal world war by themselves. Like, ultimately, we are all at the mercy of forces much larger than ourselves. Like, even royalty only has so much influence and say over the direction the world moves in. And Alec and company do manage to save some lives, but they don't change that much, really. However, part of me feels like maybe that's not what the author was trying to say. Like, I think maybe he was trying to just tell a story about Alec, and tell a story where we see Alec become someone who is worthy of being emperor. You know, we're seeing him struggle and sacrifice for the benefit of others, and we're seeing him do the right thing instead of seeking quick fixes for problems. Like, sure, he could have just stood back and let Nikola Tesla blow up Berlin, but he wasn't going to sacrifice innocent people, no matter what. And again, the weapon didn't actually work, but everybody thought it would at the time. The point is, the story here is about Alec and his journey to become worthy of his family legacy. It's not really about the war, or about how Alec and his friends managed to save the world, or anything like that. And while I think that's a fine idea, on paper, I don't think it works all that well in practice, because the characters are all trying to stop the war, and then they fail. So what's the resolution to this story? It doesn't really have one. And I get it, journey before destination, but that doesn't mean the destination is allowed to be a wet fart. So while I like Leviathan, I want to emphasize that. I do like these books. I don't love them. I see too many problems. I can see why other people love it, though. And I think if I had read this as a kid, maybe it would have a special place in my heart the way it clearly does for a lot of you. Because, again, I've gotten a lot of requests for this over the years. And, yeah, I think that's about all I have to say. Like, if I read this when I was younger, it would have a special place in my heart. As it stands now, it's good. So that's all. Thank you for watching. Be sure to rate the video, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Please check out my Patreon, or become a YouTube channel member, or maybe go to my merch store. Did you know I have a Cameo page? You should check all that out. Or if you don't feel like doing that, then thanks for watching this far. Goodbye. Hello to everyone, especially hello to the people who watched the entire video up until this point. You're awesome. These names you see on screen here, these are my patrons. I want to give a special shout out to my $10 and up patrons, 3 Cat Day, Arthur D. Gonzalez Martin, Brother Santodes, Carolina Clay, Chaotic Entity 1, Chris Goldapp, Lexi DeLorme, Lord Tiebreaker, Michael and Katie Hake, Mr. A5013, Proscriptions of Dwojang, PsychXS, Toa Michael, Vey Victus, and Wesley. I could not do this without you guys. You being here really does mean the world to me. If you want to get your name on here, consider donating to my Patreon. It starts at just $1 a month. You can also become a YouTube channel member, or check out my merchandise store, or go over on Cameo and buy a shout out from me. Or if you don't feel like doing any of that, you can always just rate the video and comment on it and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Did you know I have a second channel, which I haven't uploaded to in a while? Because I have one of those too. Anyways, yeah, see ya. Goodbye. There's no way to say goodbye here that doesn't sound awkward, but goodbye.